Yo, what's good,
What's
everybody?
what's good, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Save the Date. One of your hosts, Heath.
What's good, y'all? This is Jamie. As Heath said, welcome to another episode of Save the Date. Today, we're talking about the role of vulnerability.
Yes,
How,
for
how to
sure.
open up yourself without losing yourself,
Yeah.
and why vulnerability is key to authentic relationships and how to embrace it. I
Yeah.
know that's a mouthful, but essentially, we're just talking about vulnerability. This is going to be a really chill conversation. I'm going to kick it off with just by saying vulnerability starts within. And this is a saying that I learned a long time ago, but honesty with self is honesty with the world. Like, if you cannot be honest with yourself about who you are, where you are in life, the things that make you who you are, your idiosyncrasies, your flaws, the things that make you great. If you can't honor those things and acknowledge those things internally, you will not acknowledge them externally or with anyone else. And I say that because I feel like a lot of times I see people, and I've even done this, I've tried to curate a personality or a persona that I think others want to see from me. And, it's attracted people, and I think it's conditioned them to get to know a version of me that is not something that I can sustain all the
Yeah.
time. We used to say you ain't got a lie to kick it. I've lied to kick it. You know what I'm saying?
Throw you
I,
tricks in your mentions, little Tupac right there.
I mean, not necessarily lied, but I've had to embellish on the cut,
Hmm.
as Q-Tip would say. I've had to embellish on the cut, or maybe make myself seem like I'm more than what I am, or I have more than what I do. So, I think, like I said, it starts within and with self, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're talking about this today. Because, as we said with dating, we want this to be a process and experience where people learn about others, but also learn about themselves. So that's why I kicked it off with honesty starts with that. But Heath?
Yeah. So the first thing I think about is vulnerability is what is vulnerability? And it's a noun, obviously, but I also think of vulnerability as a process. So you want to be vulnerable with your truth, with who you are and who you're becoming. And the reason I call it a process is because I don't think we've reached vulnerability as if there's just some kind of enlightened state that exists within yourself or with another person. I think there may be a feeling of that at times, but I don't think that's just what it is. I think people who are vulnerable, they see it as a method, a way of communicating their authentic self, who they truly are to someone else. Now, they could be doing that in the sense of a story, a factoid about their life, a revelation about their life, and doing it in a way that's just freely who they are, meaning they're saying something that may be uncomfortable because it violates social norms. It may even violate a little bit of the conversational norms of your relationship. Maybe you guys aren't accustomed to going deep or having a really authentic conversation about each other or about the relationship, especially when you're dating. You're trying to find that spot where vulnerability matters. Typically, I think it matters coming right out of the gate. But for some people, it's awkward for a variety of reasons: traumas, childhood programming. They've been hurt, they've been vulnerable and jeered or laughed at, made the butt of a joke. So I get why some people are very shy, lack of a better word, about being vulnerable. They want to make sure that it's the right space. And we're going to get into space and environment because all that matters. But I really want people to challenge themselves or just expose themselves, that they see vulnerability as a method of interacting and engaging with themselves and with others. As you said, I love what you said, honesty. That's the first step in engaging with vulnerability with yourself, being honest about who you are, dropping the social norms that sometimes can even get into our minds. So we're by ourselves, but the programming is loud and clear. Whatever you learned at your house of worship, whatever you learned at your home, whatever you learned at school, whatever you learned in your local friendship circle, it's still loud and clear. And they're asking you, how could you think like that? How could you want that? Why do you feel this way? You shouldn't feel that way. And so you engage in almost a sense of, as this professor from NYU said, law professor, his book called Uncovering. Can't remember his name right now. But it's all about how you cover up when you're in public so you don't reveal your true self, because your true self will be open to the spears, the spears and the swords of others. And so you have to think about what you're going to do when you're by yourself and you're the one holding the spear and you're the one holding the sword. So people at times have to learn how to get real and be vulnerable with themselves first. That's why I really appreciate what you said about honesty, because that's the first step in doing that.
Yeah. And we're not saying to just come out like you said, it is definitely important out the gate, but that needs to be tempered also throughout the process because there's a baked in risk for exposing things about yourself and getting deep and being open and opening up the treasure chest, Pandora's box of your life. There's some risk in that. We all have like a fear of rejection sometimes, or a fear of being called weird or othered. And I think for a lot of times, people that can get in the way of people wanting to be vulnerable and opening up that Pandora's box. But to your point, it is important to get out of the gate because I think it'll help you. One, I think it helps strengthen your emotional connection and intelligence with somebody. Like, we all want to be seen for who we are. Like you said, every human being wants to be seen and heard. We all want to feel acknowledged. So, vulnerability can get you there, being open can get you there. But, like I said, it definitely has to be tempered because somebody may not be ready for your level of vulnerability. And while you think, I'm just being open, I want them to know who I am, y'all may not have laid the groundwork for them to receive that yet.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, listen, vulnerability is attractive, I think, in certain contexts,
Mm,
and it works because we're talking about dating. We could talk about at your job or anywhere else, but this is for a dating podcast. So, keeping it to dating, it definitely attracts and it definitely creates opportunities to accelerate the trust building process. Because ultimately, when people feel safe around you and they feel that you're trustworthy, you're in like Flynn. And oftentimes, what you're seeking, whether it's companionship, someone to open their heart and doors to you, you're going to have that happen a lot quicker if you're being vulnerable. Number one. Number two, if you're creating a brave and safe space for them to be vulnerable. So I keep mentioning this book, Super Communicators by Charles Duhigg. And one of the things he talks about is this FBI agent who's just skilled at that. And I've mentioned it several times in the podcast, and I'm going to keep mentioning it because the question he asked when he was being studied by these social scientists, when they asked him, how do you do it? How are you able to convince people, criminals in the midst of their criminal activity, to drop what they're doing and follow your lead and essentially give themselves up? And he goes, I'm going to answer that question, but the first question I have for you is, what's your favorite memory? And this person just started talking about their daughter being married. And right there, he talked about his sister, right? His sister being married in 2010, but she died shortly thereafter. You're exchanging vulnerable moments where you're being sucked in, not into you, or the person's not being sucked into you, or you're not being sucked into them. You're creating a dynamic of trust together, something that's new, novel, and unique, and expressly anchored between the both of you. That is something that will be treasured once you leave that conversation. And if you continue to have interactions with that person, i.e., you're dating them, it'll continue to be built upon as you go along. And that is something that is just an opportunity that you just don't want to miss.
it's a beautiful feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. Whether you're a casual dater or you're dating for finding, discovering love, as we like to say here, trust me, this is just the better process to go into, as opposed to trying to be a person, as Jay said, that you are not. If someone doesn't appreciate your vulnerability, that just may be a sign that this is not a fit for you. And you move on to a better fit.
I mean, listen, I have never heard of pizza without tomato sauce. Vulnerability is the tomato sauce of relationships. Man. There
Thinking with
really
that
is
pizza
no
concept, yeah.
there really is no relationship without it.
You can have the cheese without it, but yeah, the tomato sauce usually is the linchpin.
Yeah, and you can have the bread and all that other, accoutrement that you want to put on it. But if it ain't got the tomato sauce and the bread and the cheese, it's not a real pizza. But I say that to say how important it is it like impacts so many different parts of the relationship. Like we talked about strengthening that emotional intimacy, but even the physical intimacy, when you're able to talk about maybe some of the things that you might have gone through in the past that have shaped who you are as a lover, and give somebody some like insight and understanding to who you are, yeah, it could really amplify and enhance that physical experience. You may
Yeah.
find yourself tarrying.
Darian.
Listen, you got the hands up, you're worshiping.
Yeah.
I mean, but I think, I think a lot of times we assume that that's on autopilot because it's so easy to have physical relations. But just because you're having the relations doesn't mean you're actually relating or connecting or
True
being
indeed.
vulnerable. You know what I mean? That's just your body doing what your body does.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's much to be said about how vulnerability enhances your sex life, because
Hmm.
we know, and what we espouse here is connected sex is the best sex. But that's a conversation for another time. That's a conversation for another time. So, what do you do when you want to learn how to be more vulnerable? Maybe you're unpracticed, you're unskilled in being vulnerable. So, the first thing you have to do is mind the environment. What do I mean by mind the environment? You have to think of three views: who, when, and where. Let's take it from the top. Who are you speaking to? Obviously, in the context of dating, you're speaking to somebody you're getting to know, either via text on a dating app, or you're speaking to them FaceTime or face to face or on the phone, if you guys are still believing the phone. Then where are you talking? Are you at a loud bar? Are you in a crowded restaurant? Are you in a secluded space bar lounge where you can talk over dinner? Something intimate with a candlelight. Where are you? When? Two things about when. When are you speaking as far as the time of the day? Are you talking late at night? Some people get on the phone 11 o'clock in the night. Next thing you know, it's 4 in the morning. Great time. And some of those are the most great revealing conversations you're going to have. But also think about when in the context of when are you in the timeline of meeting? Did y'all just swipe right? Sorry, did y'all just swipe? Y'all agreed like you were a match and now y'all talking and you starting the data dump? And we're going to talk about that. Vulnerability is not just a data dump.
Yeah,
It's
no,
not
it
just
can't
you
be.
just dropping factoids about your life that may be the more poignant or traumatic events of your life happening in this almost verbal vomit, projectile vomit way. No, we're bringing this up because we want you to think about who you're talking to, when you're talking to them, and where, because we want you to become more practiced and to take the risk in becoming more practiced at being vulnerable. So if you have a good person you're speaking to, the time is right as far as where you are in your relationship, maybe not immediately, but over time. Maybe after like the third or fourth time you've been talking, you're going to start getting a little bit deeper, and where you're doing it. And where also considering privacy, because you don't know what that person's going to share back and you want their privacy to be respected. Then you're vulnerable. Find those stories or those personality traits, those quirks that you have. I know some people that get on the phone and they're animated and they do like these little like corny voices. Hey, what's up? What's going on? And yeah, she said this. And yo, that for some person, maybe they're being vulnerable. They're a little more like they got their inner actor out, their inner comedian, and they're displaying it in front of you. If that's you, take that risk and do that and naturally in your conversations. Don't just insert it. Someone's talking about their grandmother's funeral, and you're like, oh, your grandmother was in the casket saying, oh, why am I dead? Like, yeah, don't do that. Don't do Cartman, South Park, a
It's not the
dark
time to
humor.
become Rodney Dangerfield.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, but if you can find a way to bring it out and you're just uncomfortable being vulnerable, use these little things these quirks you have, use some stories that you're comfortable telling as a way to start practicing being vulnerable when you're meeting people or when you're on dates. I think it's just a good way to build it into your process so it becomes more natural to you.
As you call it, or you mentioned it before, those choke points of discomfort, use them as an opportunity to be vulnerable. And yeah, no, I mean, I think I want to go back to something you said just about like vulnerability not being a data dump. Man,
Yeah.
let's park the car over there and talk
Mhm.
about that for a second. Because I know that I have been in situations where I have felt like women were asking me about childhood stuff, traumatic stuff, so that they can present themselves as empathetic, sympathetic,
Mhm.
concerned.
Mhm.
And it's like, while I appreciate that, up front, I was always leery because I'm like, yo, are they trying to give off this nurturer energy that I didn't ask for? Or are they trying to present themselves as someone
Savior.
who's just a savior or who just I have the caring gene. I'm a care
Yeah,
bear.
I
You
can
know what I'm
fix you.
saying? I can fix you. Yes. I've been leery of that in the past. Now I have learned to, not necessarily have that bombastic side eye, towards everybody because everybody ain't on that type of time. But I know that there have been times in the past where I felt like women were setting it up for me to data dump.
Mm.
But like, how do you know when you're data dumping? How do you know when it's gone from like you being open to you like trauma or emotional dumping? How do you know?
I don't think there's a hard and fast rule, but the first thing that came to my mind when you asked that question is if you're texting, because a lot of people are going to be texting and people like to text now, it's just the nature of dating. Whether you're texting or you're speaking, do you find yourself the only person speaking for an extended period of time where
Mm,
you are just going from story to story, factoid to factoid, point to point about all of the traumatic events that you've been through, and you're not hearing any engagement from the other person, leaving room for follow-up questions, or just a rest to see how you're feeling about what you're revealing, which you should be monitoring, and then also how they feel about what you're revealing. How do they feel about what you're revealing? Because sometimes it may be too much for them based on what they've went through.
right. You could be triggering them and not even know.
even though it's an unrelated action. So you went on a date with somebody and recently you had a death in your family.
Hmm.
And then you're making the death about a bunch of political things that happened in the hospital, treatment that you felt went awry, people weren't paying attention. I know what I'm talking about. And then you tie it into maybe the current administration, whatever administration's in power at the time or active at the moment. And this is why, I have a problem with insert the political group that you don't like. And here we go.
This is
Now
why
you went
Luigi's
from
out here.
talking about a very traumatic event of losing a loved one due to what you would call incompetence or malpractice or medical neglect to now connecting that to the current political environment we're in, then making it about the support, quote unquote supporters or the group of people who support that political environment. And so you're showing somebody that are you weaponizing your trauma just to talk about these people? Is this where you really wanted to go? You've got a back door to criticize and label these group of people that you think are the real enemies of the planet, the real enemies of humanity and humankind. Or are you
Yeah.
talking about this
Yeah.
legit story
Yeah.
of a loved one who lost their life in a hospital? Now, this person might have had a similar event or someone recently just died. And maybe the people that you're criticizing now as these political supporters is where that person comes from, that family comes from. And now this person thinks you're not going to be empathetic that I had a similar experience of trauma or loss because you're just going to say, I'm one of these political supporters. So here you went on this rant connecting all these dots all over. You ever seen the Sherlock Holmes map with people's pictures and the red string goes here and the red string goes there? Who can connect the bombing in Strasbourg to the poisoning of a tycoon in India to the death of a cotton manufacturer in Atlanta, Georgia?
Right.
Yeah, once you start doing that, you're data dumping. You're forging connections that people are going to be hard to follow because they're not experienced with the trauma and they don't know how your mind works. You're just meeting somebody potentially for the first time on a date. It's not necessarily going to go over well. And if you've just been talking and talking like this for almost 10 minutes straight,
That's the data dump. I like that's a good indicator. If that person hasn't contributed to the conversation, if they can't get a word in edgewise, because it's all about your trauma and what you've been through, that's a good way to know
yeah,
you
and you're
might just be
painting
dumping.
everything with that trauma, doesn't mean doesn't exist, but
Hmm.
if you want to avoid the data dump, you got to think about that from that perspective.
Damn, that's real. I feel like I've been there before where, I have asked about because somebody might have mentioned something and I've asked about it, might have been related to a childhood incident, and like they really did go on a tirade about it becoming about this, all these meta conversations that they were having about trying to get to, and I was just like, yo, I wasn't even ready for that. That's a level of vulnerability I was not ready for. I didn't know that you was gonna tell me about the generational curses in the family and people
Yes.
being, and I was like, ooh,
Yes. And the
you need,
aliens and
and I was
Roswell.
like, yo, I could tell she needed to get it off her chest, but I just wish she had a little bit of consideration for that being like the second time we talked.
Well, that's the point I'm making. When? Who, when, where? When in the timeline of getting to know each other are you having that conversation? Are you having it up front? I mean, I've heard people having conversations like this on the first meetup,
Listen, I mean, I almost kind of
but it
look
didn't
at
go
it like,
well.
oh, okay. Well, I was going to say, I don't know if I could have a hard rule of thumb against it because I almost look
No.
at it as the same way of like sleeping together on the first night. If the energy is there for it and y'all can manage it, I'm not
Some
saying
people
I'm
have gotten
for it.
married like that.
That's what I was going to say. That
But
we could never tell the outcome. But to your point about tried and
absolutely.
true methods, that may not be the best time to do it.
That's all I'm talking about. I can
Yeah.
only give you tried and true methods. Can you get rich off the lottery? People do every year.
Yeah, that Mega Million gets won just about every
Yeah.
year. Yeah,
Are there drug dealers who got into the drug game, got out, and have legitimate businesses and they got out unscathed? No prison time, no murder, no death. Yes.
absolutely. Right.
But tried and true, what happens on average? I just want to deal with the average. That's
Yeah,
all I'm
for
saying.
sure.
You do what you want to do and what you're feeling in the moment. Absolutely. I'm not on your date with you. You're not dating me. And I'm not
Right.
dating you. So
Yeah.
please rock out.
Yeah.
But at just some points to consider about data dumping because vulnerability isn't to me also just about your traumas. Vulnerability sometimes can be about your dreams,
Mm-hmm.
your vision,
Mm-hmm. Your goals.
your goals.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to cure malaria. Maybe you want to eradicate malaria. You have these big dreams, these big goals, and you want to eradicate malaria, but you weren't able to go to school and get a public health degree. You right now work at a Regal Cinema and you want to go back and get a doctorate in public health and help eradicate malaria. And you're 25 years old, you're late, quote unquote, to the game, working in a movie theater. And you're vulnerable now because now you have to say to a bunch of people who may look at you as a 25-year-old movie theater worker, you ain't qualified, you don't have, what are you talking about? Maybe you should aim lower, eradicate malaria. Do you know biochemistry? Do you know org chemistry, org chem? When's the last time you wrote a paper or read a book on? And there's people just throwing these spears, waving their swords around, trying to get at you. So there's vulnerability about real things that go beyond your traumas.
And that takes a lot of vulnerability because that's where a lot of that fear of rejection and people talking down about what you share comes from. Because I mean, especially in our church community, we've heard that a lot. Like, yo, you can't share your dreams with everybody. You can't share your anointing or your vision or your gifts with everybody. They're not for everybody. I mean, they're for the people. They're not for you to hoard, but they're not for everyone. You can cast your pearls, but don't do it before a swan.
I agree. And I just want to say this additional thing about vulnerability that I think is very important, which is share your story. Be genuine about your story. Being vulnerable means you're telling and showing people who you truly are. Share your stories. And the reason why stories are powerful is because stories are what unite us as human beings. Music does, you say laughter does too, but stories, people, once they get a hold of a story, it's hard to outlogic a story. You try to use rational arguments to confound the impact of a story, and that's never going to happen.
Never going to happen. Yeah.
Never going to happen. It's like trying to hold water with your bare hand. It's never going to happen. And stories motivate us, they encourage us, and they give us something to hold on to. And you'll be surprised, the more you're really vulnerable about your stories, whether your stories are about your vision for your future, eradicating malaria, or it's about things you've been through, the more people will be drawn to you. And this is why we said earlier, to go back to our point about sex, some of the best sex is connected sex, and some of the best connected sex starts as people being vulnerable with each other.
Conversation.
Feeling free with each other, feeling safe with each other. And you get to safety through trust, and trust is really built through vulnerability.
Facts.
I'm vulnerable with you, you're vulnerable with me. I took my clothes off, you didn't laugh, you took your clothes off, and I encouraged you. There we go.
Yeah.
Now we're in this together.
Yeah.
Now clothes I'm using, you can literally or metaphorically.
Yep. Now we're naked in front of each other, to your point.
And you smiled and said it was good.
Amen. Smiled and said it was good.
And that made me want to be more of me and to help you be more of you. Now we're in a different space when we talk about sex. Now we're in a different space when we talk about swapping genetic information.
Yeah.
We're in a different space now.
Got a higher level of passion for it. I got a higher desire for it because, like you said, I've shown you who I am and you want more of it. It's only going to fuel me to want to show more. And hopefully it does the same for the partner, for the other person. Yeah.
It goes the old phrase from Enoch from Boardwalk Empire, the character played by Steve Buscemi. One hand washes the other.
And both hands
wash the face.
Yeah. I feel like people are going to get tired of hearing us say that, but that's a staple.
Yeah, that is.
That's a staple.
You on this podcast, you're going to hear us say that over and over again.
Yeah.
One hand washes the other, and both hands wash the face.
It's a beautiful, word picture or imagery when you think about what that means, because you have one hand that can wash your face and you could be done with it. But it's like it's showing you when we take care of each other.
Yeah, everything is clean.
Everything is clean.
Because one hand just can't get as clean as it can by itself. It gets cleaner when both hands are providing the friction and the soap and the water, and then the face needs to be clean, and now we're clean. We're refreshed. We're here. And there's nothing that beats that.
Yeah.
And trust me, if someone gets vulnerable with you and just encourage them to let them know, thank you, and it was good. You don't have to judge it. Doesn't mean you're going to agree with everything that you hear that's said. Doesn't mean you should. Thank you for being vulnerable with me. Thank you for being you with me. That's it.
That kind of acknowledgement is this almost feels like aftercare. You're just saying that.
Yeah, because I think, and I've heard Brene Brown say this at a conference many years ago, when you go to ask somebody what their point is on a topic nowadays, what they'll do is think about the group that they belong to, whether it's liberal, right-wing, progressive, moderate, conservative Democrat, liberal Republican, whatever it is on the political spectrum. Then you add in the race level, the sexual orientation, the gender identity. What does that group say I should be saying? And then I'm going to parrot back out to you what needs to be said.
Mm.
And oftentimes people are finding it hard to be themselves, to challenge their own ideas, to be vulnerable and say, you know what, they say this, but this is what I think. This is how I
Or I
think.
don't know. That's
Or
also
I
a
don't
really
know.
vulnerable. Yeah.
Or I don't know,
Yeah.
which should be used by a lot of us more often.
More often. Yes, Lord.
So you don't have to agree with everything, but create an environment where you can be vulnerable with yourself, like Jay said, and you encourage others to be vulnerable with you. And on that note, until next time, I'm Heath.
I'm Jamie. Thanks for letting us be vulnerable with you.
Yeah, exactly. Save the date, socials, and the liner notes. You guys
All
have a
right,
great
y'all.
week.
Peace.